Why don't I have a mother like everyone else? The question hung in the air of the dimly lit bedroom, catching James Bennet off guard as he tucked his son into bed. Ethan's blue eyes, so much like his late wife's, stared up at him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "You had a mother, buddy. We've talked about this." James sat on the edge of the bed, his hand resting on the premium Egyptian cotton sheets that covered his son. Everything in their mansion was premium, perfect expensive, everything except the gaping hole in their lives. "No, Dad, you never really talk about her. When I ask, you just say she's gone and changed the subject." Ethan sat up, his Spider-Man pajamas rustling against the pillows. "Today in school we had to make Mother's Day cards. Everyone else knew what to write. I just sat there." James ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, his designer watch catching the soft light from the bedside lamp. 8 years of success in the corporate world hadn't prepared him for moments like these. He could navigate billion-dollar deals, but his son's simple questions left him paralyzed. "Miss Thompson said I could make one for Grandma instead," Ethan continued, his voice smaller now. "But that's not the same. Tommy has 2 cards to make, one for his real mom and one for his stepmom. Even Billy, who lives with his dad, gets to visit his mom on weekends. It's different for us, Ethan." James struggled to find the right words. "Your mother, she's not just away. She's dead. I know that." Ethan's bluntness made James wince. "But what was she like? Did she like pizza? Did she read books to me? Did she sing? Everyone else has stories about their mom. I don't even have that." James stood up abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, the manicured gardens of their estate stretched into the darkness, as empty as the conversations he kept having with his son. The cleaning service had left everything spotless. The nanny had organized Ethan's schedule perfectly, but none of that filled the void. "She loved pizza," he finally said, his voice rough. "Hawaiian was her favorite, which I always told her was a crime against Italian cuisine." Ethan's face lit up at this small detail, hungry for more. What else? But James was already retreating. "It's getting late, buddy. You have school tomorrow." He moved toward the door, ignoring the disappointment that clouded his son's features. "Sleep tight." "Dad," Ethan called out just as James reached for the light switch. "Tommy's mom volunteers at the school library every Wednesday. Could you maybe ask someone to be my mom just for the reading circle?" The question stopped James cold. "Ethan, we can't just—" "Please," his son's voice cracked. "I'll tell everyone she's my aunt or something. I just want to know what it feels like, just once." James flicked off the light, his hand trembling slightly. "Good night, Ethan." He closed the door and leaned against it, loosening his tie as if it might help him breathe easier. Down the hall, the housekeeper was finishing up for the night, her quiet movements a reminder of the staff that kept their life running smoothly. Everyone had their place, their role, their purpose, except for the one role they couldn't fill. James pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts. Therapists, child psychologists, grief counselors. He'd talked to them all. They offered strategies, techniques, coping mechanisms, but none of them could give Ethan what he really wanted, a mother's love, even if just for a moment. As he walked down the grand staircase toward his study, Ethan's words echoed in his mind. "Could you maybe ask someone to be my mum?" An impossible idea began to take shape, one that would either heal his son's heart or shatter what little stability they had left. James poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and stared out at the city lights below. Tomorrow he would have to make a decision that would change everything. He just didn't know yet how much. The morning brought a steady drizzle that matched James's mood as he drove Ethan to Westbrook Academy. His son sat quietly in the back seat, last night's conversation still hanging between them like a heavy curtain. "Traffic's awful today," James commented, more to fill the silence than anything else. Through the windshield wipers, he could see the line of luxury vehicles ahead, all waiting to drop off their precious cargo at one of the city's most exclusive private schools. As they inched forward, James noticed a figure huddled under the bus stop shelter across from the school. Something about her posture caught his attention. The way she held herself, despite her weathered clothes, suggested someone who hadn't always lived on the streets. "Dad?" Ethan's voice drew his attention back. "Can we have pizza tonight? Hawaiian?" James's throat tightened. "Sure, buddy." He pulled up to the drop-off zone, where an umbrella-wielding teacher waited to escort students inside. "Have a good day at school." As Ethan disappeared into the building, James found his eyes drawn back to the bus shelter. The woman had moved to its edge, and for a moment, the morning light caught her face. His heart stopped. The resemblance was uncanny. Instead of pulling away, James parked his Tesla in the school's visitor lot. He sat there for several minutes watching as other parents departed, and the woman remained, seemingly with nowhere to go. His rational mind screamed at him to drive away, but Ethan's words from last night wouldn't let him. Taking his umbrella, James crossed the street. As he approached the shelter, he could see her more clearly. She was younger than he'd first thought, probably in her early 30s. Dark hair hung in damp waves around a face that, though marked by hardship, held a dignified beauty. "Excuse me," he said, stopping at a respectful distance. She looked up, and James felt another jolt. Her eyes were the same shade of blue as his late wife's. "I'm not bothering anyone," she said quietly but firmly. "This is a public shelter." "No, that's not—" James paused, suddenly aware of how this must look. A man in a $3,000 suit approaching a homeless woman. "I'm James Bennett. I noticed you've been here a while." "Sarah," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Sarah Mitchell. And yes, it's dry here." Her accent suggested education, refinement. It only confirmed what he'd sensed about her background. "Would you like some coffee? There's a cafe around the corner." She studied him with a wariness born of hard experience. "Why?" "Because it's cold, and I'd like to talk to you about something." He held her gaze. "Something unusual." Sarah gathered her worn backpack, her only possession it seemed, and stood. "I don't do unusual things for money, Mr. Bennett. It's not like that," he said quickly. "It's about my son. He needs help with something. Something only you might be able to provide." A mix of curiosity and suspicion crossed her face. After what seemed like an eternal moment, she nodded. "Coffee sounds good, but we sit by the window, and I keep my backpack with me." "Of course." As they walked to the cafe, James's mind raced. What he was considering was madness, unethical, possibly illegal. But when Sarah spoke again, her voice carried the same gentle tone that had once soothed Ethan to sleep. "Your son," she said. "He's the boy in the Spider-Man backpack." James nodded, surprised. "I see him sometimes through the shelter glass. He always looks a little lost." James held the cafe door open for her, wondering if fate had finally decided to be kind, or if he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. The cafe's warmth enveloped them as they settled into a corner table. Sarah's hands wrapped around the steaming mug of coffee, while James stirred his untouched espresso, searching for words. "I was a teacher," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Third grade, until about 8 months ago." James looked up, surprised by the voluntary information. "What happened?" "Life." She took a sip of coffee. "My mother got sick. Stage 4 pancreatic. No insurance. I spent everything I had on her treatment, maxed out credit cards, took loans. After she passed, the medical bills kept coming. Then the foreclosure notice, then—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "This. I'm sorry," James said, meaning it. "That's not right. Neither is whatever you're about to propose." Sarah's blue eyes fixed on him. "I've seen that look before, Mr. Bennett. The wealthy man with a problem he thinks money can solve. So why don't you tell me what this is really about?" James leaned forward, his voice low. "My son Ethan lost his mother when he was barely a year old. Cancer, like your mother. He's been asking questions lately, wanting to know what it feels like to have a mother's presence in his life. And I look like her," Sarah concluded, her expression unreadable. "Yes." James pulled out his phone, showing her a photo. This was Claire. Sarah studied the image, her face softening. "The resemblance is striking, but I still don't understand what you're suggesting." "I want you to help give my son memories." James put his phone away. "Not as a replacement for Claire, but as someone who can share stories about her, be there for school events, help him understand who his mother was through experiences he can relate to." Sarah set her coffee down hard enough to slosh liquid onto the table. "You want me to pretend to be your dead wife?" "No," James said quickly. "I want you to help tell her story, to be a bridge between Ethan and the mother he never knew, by lying to him, by giving him something he desperately needs." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And what do I get out of this elaborate deception, besides compromising whatever morals I have left?" "A fresh start," James said. "The guest house on my property, a stipend, time to get back on your feet, pay off your debts, rebuild your life, and maybe a chance to make a difference in a child's life." "You're insane," Sarah whispered, but she hadn't left the table. "Probably," James agreed, "but I'm also desperate. I watch my son struggle every day with this void in his life. I've tried everything else." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns in the spilled coffee. "How would this even work? You'd stay in the guest house. I'd give you details about Claire, her interests, her habits, stories from our life together. You'd spend time with Ethan, share these stories naturally, help him connect with the idea of his mother. And when he discovers the truth, because he will, Mr. Bennet, children always do. James met her gaze steadily. Then at least he'll have had some time to understand what having a mother feels like. Some memories to hold on to, even if they're not quite real. Sarah stood abruptly, gathering her backpack. I need time to think about this. Of course. James pulled out a business card and wrote an address on the back. This is where I live. If you decide, just come by any time. She took the card, studying it before slipping it into her pocket. This is crazy, you know that? Yes. And probably wrong on so many levels. Yes. Sarah walked to the door, then paused. That photo of your wife, she was wearing a necklace, a small silver compass. James blinked in surprise. Yes, she never took it off. How did you... My mother had the same one, Sarah said softly. Said it would always help her find her way home. With that, she stepped out into the rain, leaving James alone with his impossible proposal, and the faint hope that sometimes the wrong thing might be the right answer. 3 days later, Sarah stood at the gates of the Bennet estate, her backpack containing everything she owned. The intercom crackled when she pressed it. Yes? James's voice came through clear and uncertain. It's Sarah. Sarah Mitchell. She paused. I've made my decision. The gate swung open silently, and Sarah walked up the curved driveway, taking in the manicured landscape. The main house loomed ahead, but her attention was drawn to the smaller structure to the right, the guest house James had mentioned. He met her at the front door, looking both relieved and terrified. You came. I have conditions, she said immediately. Non-negotiable ones. James nodded, leading her inside to his study. Sarah remained standing, despite the comfortable leather chairs. First, I won't pretend to be Claire. I'll share stories about her, but I won't claim to be her. Second, I want everything in writing. The arrangement, the compensation, everything. Third, I need autonomy to look for work and rebuild my life. This isn't my permanent solution. Agreed to all, James said too quickly. I'm not finished, Sarah continued. Most importantly, if at any point this seems to be hurting Ethan rather than helping him, it stops immediately. No questions asked. James sat behind his desk, considering her words. Those all seem reasonable. I've had my lawyer draw up a contract that covers most of this. Would you like to review it? Sarah finally sat down. You moved fast. I'm a businessman. It's what I do. He slid a document across the desk. Take your time reading it. While Sarah reviewed the contract, James explained the practical details. The guest house was fully furnished. She would receive a monthly stipend, health insurance, and a separate account for expenses. In return, she would spend time with Ethan 3 days a week after school and attend important family events. What about your staff? Sarah asked, looking up from the papers. What do they know? Only that you're an old family friend who's helping with Ethan while getting back on your feet. Maria, the housekeeper, and Thomas, my driver, are the only full-time staff. They're discreet. Sarah signed the contract, her hand steady. When do we start? Ethan will be home from school in an hour. I thought, James hesitated, maybe you could join us for dinner. The guest house was beautiful, with large windows overlooking a small garden. Sarah stood in the bedroom, running her hand over the soft comforter, still struggling to believe this was real. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Maria, the housekeeper, with fresh towels and a gentle smile. Dinner will be served at 6, Miss Mitchell, she said, her accent warm and melodious. The young master is very excited to meet his mother's old friend. Sarah's stomach clenched at the words. Thank you, Maria. Alone again, she unpacked her meager belongings and showered, washing away months of hardship. The clothes James had arranged for her fit perfectly, simple but elegant pieces that helped her look like the person she used to be. At 5:55, she stood before the mirror, barely recognizing herself. What are you doing? She whispered to her reflection, but she already knew the answer. She was trying to find her way home, just like her mother's compass had promised. She just hadn't expected home to be built on such a delicate foundation of half-truths and good intentions. The main house's dinner bell chimed softly across the courtyard. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped out into her new life, hoping she wasn't about to break a little boy's heart in her attempt to heal it. Did you really know my mom in college? Ethan asked, pushing his peas around his plate. His first question of the evening came after 20 minutes of careful observation. Sarah set down her fork, meeting his curious gaze. Your father told me so much about her time there, she said carefully, threading truth through fiction. About how she used to study under the big oak tree near the library. James shifted in his chair but remained silent. They had spent hours the previous day going through photos and stories, preparing for moments like this. Did she like peas? Ethan asked, still waging war with his vegetables. Actually, Sarah smiled, leaning in conspiratorially. She had a secret for making them taste better. She reached for the pepper mill. May I? Ethan nodded, intrigued. Sarah sprinkled fresh pepper and a tiny bit of butter over his peas. Try them now. This is how your mum used to eat them. James watched as his son cautiously tasted the doctored vegetables. Hey, that's better. I hate peas too, Sarah confessed, but sometimes we have to find ways to make the things we don't like more bearable. The tension in the room eased slightly. Ethan began asking more questions, simple ones at first about favorite colors and books, then gradually more specific ones about Claire's life. Sarah navigated each query carefully, weaving the facts James had shared with universal truths about motherhood she'd learned from her own mother. When she didn't know something, she redirected gently rather than fabricate details. After dinner, Ethan showed Sarah his homework, a book report on Bridge to Terabithia. Your mom loved reading, Sarah said, drawing from James's stories, especially books about magical places and brave kids. Dad never told me that, Ethan said, looking at his father. James cleared his throat. There's a lot I should have shared sooner, buddy. Could you... Ethan hesitated, looking at Sarah. Could you help me with my report? Like you used to help kids when you were a teacher. Sarah felt James tense beside her, but she kept her focus on Ethan. I'd like that. Why don't we read a chapter together, and I'll show you how to take good notes. They settled in the living room, Ethan between them on the sofa. As Sarah helped him identify key themes and characters, she noticed James watching them, his expression a mix of guilt and relief. Later, after Ethan went to bed, Sarah lingered in the kitchen with James. You did well, he said softly. Better than I expected. I didn't lie to him, Sarah replied. Not really. I just helped him see his mother through the things you've told me. The peas thing, was that true about your mother? Sarah nodded. Some stories can be true even if they come from different places. She gathered her bag to leave, but James stopped her. Sarah, thank you for being careful with him. I'm not doing this for you, Mr. Bennett. She met his gaze steadily. I'm doing it because every child deserves to know they come from love, even if that love isn't here anymore. Walking back to the guest house under the stars, Sarah touched the small silver compass hanging from a chain around her neck, her mother's last gift. For the first time in months, its weight felt like guidance rather than grief. The next 2 weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Sarah spent afternoons helping Ethan with homework, each session sprinkled with carefully chosen stories about Claire. The boy flourished under her attention, his grades improving and his questions becoming more confident. One Tuesday afternoon, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor of Ethan's room, surrounded by craft supplies. His science project, a model of the solar system, was due Friday. Mom loved science? Ethan asked, painting Neptune a deep blue. She did, Sarah confirmed, steadying the sphere as he worked. Your father told me she wanted to be an astronaut when she was your age. Like me. Ethan's brush paused mid-stroke. Dad never mentioned that. Sometimes it's hard for him to remember these things, Sarah said gently. It makes him sad. Ethan considered this while adding details to his planet. Are you sad too, when you remember her? Sarah chose her words carefully. I think it's okay to be sad about people we miss, but it's also okay to be happy when we remember the good things about them, like how she made peas better. Exactly like that. James found them later, surrounded by a remarkably accurate solar system. He leaned against the doorframe watching as Sarah helped Ethan attach the final strings to their ceiling-mounted display. Houston, we have liftoff, Sarah announced as they stepped back to admire their work. The planets hung in perfect orbital patterns, slowly rotating in the breeze from the window. It's awesome, Ethan beamed. Can we show Maria? After he darted off to find the housekeeper, James entered the room. I got a call from his teacher today. His participation in class has doubled in the past 2 weeks. He's a bright kid, Sarah said, cleaning up paintbrushes. He just needed someone to show him how to channel it, like Claire would have. Sarah stiffened slightly. Mr. Bennett? James, he corrected. After all this, you can call me James. James, she amended, we need to be careful. I'm helping him connect with his mother's memory, not replacing her. I know. He picked up a stray piece of glitter-covered paper. It's just, I haven't seen him this happy in years. Before Sarah could respond, Ethan returned with Maria, eagerly explaining each planet's features. The housekeeper's eyes met Sarah's over the boy's head, holding a mixture of understanding and concern. That night, Sarah sat in her guest house, updating her resume. She had a job interview tomorrow, her first since starting this arrangement. As she worked, her gaze kept drifting to the window, where she could see Ethan's planets glowing softly in his bedroom. Small victories, she thought. In teaching, in life, sometimes that's all you can hope for. One planet at a time, one story at a time, one truth woven through necessary fictions. She touched her mother's compass, wondering if this strange path she'd chosen was leading her toward redemption or deeper into a web of good intentions gone wrong. The next morning's paper would test that question in ways none of them expected. The headline caught Sarah's eye as she waited for her job interview. Tech mogul James Bennett linked to multiple corporate takeovers. Below was a picture of James at some charity gala, and beside him, Claire. The caption read, "Bennett with his late wife Claire at the 2015 Children's Hospital benefit." Sarah's hands trembled as she studied the photo. She had seen pictures of Claire before, but this one was different. Claire was laughing, caught in a moment of pure joy, her silver compass necklace catching the light. The resemblance between them was even more striking than Sarah had realized. "Miss Mitchell," the receptionist's voice pulled her back. "They're ready for you." The interview went well, almost too well. The private tutoring center was impressed by her credentials and experience. They barely questioned the gap in her employment history when she explained about caring for her sick mother. "When can you start?" the director asked. Sarah hesitated. "I have a prior commitment 3 afternoons a week." "That's fine. We can work around it. The morning sessions are actually our busiest." Walking back to the Bennett estate, Sarah felt conflicted. The job would give her independence, a step toward reclaiming her life, but it would also mean less time with Ethan, and she worried about how he would handle that. She found James in his home office, the same newspaper on his desk. "I got the job," she announced without preamble. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Congratulations. When do you start?" "Monday. Morning sessions only." She paused. "I'll still be here for Ethan in the afternoons." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Sarah sat down across from him. "We can't just suddenly reduce my time with him. It would hurt him." James stood, walking to the window. "I saw you reading the paper this morning." "The photo. She was beautiful," Sarah said softly. "I understand now why you chose me." "That's not," he turned sharply. "It wasn't just about looks. There's something about you, the way you are with him. It's different." "Different from what?" "From the act I expected." He ran a hand through his hair. "You're not playing a role. You're just helping him heal." Sarah felt a dangerous shift in the atmosphere. "Mr. Bennett, James, we need to be clear about boundaries." "Of course." He returned to his desk, professional mask back in place. "Will you tell Ethan about the job?" "I thought we could tell him together after dinner." That evening, Ethan took the news better than expected. "Will you still help me with my homework?" he asked. "Of course," Sarah promised. Nothing changes there. But something had changed. As Sarah walked back to the guest house that night, she felt it, a subtle shift in the carefully constructed balance they'd maintained. She was no longer just a conduit for Claire's memory. She was becoming something else, something unscripted. Her mother's compass felt heavier than usual against her chest. "Guide me," she whispered to it. But for the first time, she wasn't sure which direction was right anymore. The lines they'd drawn so carefully were beginning to blur, and Sarah couldn't tell if they were creating something beautiful or something dangerous. Monday brought change faster than any of them anticipated. Sarah's first day at the tutoring center went well, but by afternoon exhaustion crept in as she helped Ethan with his history project. "Are you sick?" he asked, noticing her stifle a yawn. "Just tired from my new job," Sarah explained, spreading out the timeline they were creating. "But I wouldn't miss this." "Dad says Mom never got tired," Ethan said casually, coloring in a date. "He said she could work all day and still read me stories at night." Sarah's hand paused over the papers. "Everyone gets tired sometimes, Ethan. Even your mom did, I'm sure." "But Dad said—" "Sometimes," Sarah interrupted gently, "people only remember the best parts of someone they've lost. It doesn't mean the other parts weren't there, too." Ethan considered this, his crayon hovering over the page. "Did you ever see her tired?" The question trapped her. Every answer felt like another brick in a wall of deception. "I think," she said carefully, "that being tired doesn't make someone less amazing. It just makes them human." Later that evening, she confronted James in his study. "You need to stop idealizing Claire to him." He looked up from his laptop, surprised by her directness. "Excuse me? You're creating an impossible standard. No mother is perfect, James, not even Claire. "You don't know what she was like," he said stiffly. "No, I don't, but I know what you're doing isn't helping him." Sarah leaned against his desk. "He needs to understand that it's okay to be human, to make mistakes, to get tired. Like you did today?" The words stung. "Yes, exactly like that. Because that's real. What you're giving him are fairy tales." James stood abruptly. "This arrangement wasn't about questioning my parenting. No, it was about helping your son. And right now you're making it harder for him to accept any mother figure who isn't perfect." They stared at each other, the tension thick between them. Finally, James deflated slightly. "He asked about her so much I started embellishing, making her larger than life because I thought it would help him." "It's not too late to change that narrative," Sarah said more gently. "We can help him understand that being real is better than being perfect." "We?" James caught her word choice. Sarah straightened. "Yes, we. For as long as this continues, we're both responsible for how this affects him." As she turned to leave, James called after her, "Sarah, thank you for caring enough to tell me the truth." She paused at the door. "Someone once told me that the best teachers are the ones who help us see what we're missing, not just what we want to see." That night, Sarah added another entry to the journal she'd been keeping since this began. "Day 24, she wrote. "The lines between truth and fiction are getting thinner. I'm no longer sure which side I'm standing on." She closed the journal and looked out at the main house where Ethan's bedroom light had just gone out. Somewhere between the stories and the silence, she'd stopped playing a role and started feeling something real. Something that scared her more than any lie they'd told so far. "A birthday party?" Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth during their weekly planning breakfast. "With family?" James nodded, looking equally uncomfortable. "My parents are flying in. Claire's sister, too. We can't exactly cancel Ethan's 9th birthday. And what am I supposed to be? The ghost of birthdays past?" The sarcasm in Sarah's voice masked her rising panic. "An old family friend, like we've been telling the staff." James pushed his untouched eggs around his plate. "It's just one afternoon." But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Extended family meant questions, memories, shared histories she couldn't possibly fake. The day of the party arrived with perfect weather and imperfect timing. Sarah had just finished her morning tutoring session when she received a text from James. "They're here early. Coming to main house now." She found them in the living room. James's parents, Richard and Eleanor Bennett, perfectly coiffed and quietly judging, and Claire's sister, Rachel, who stopped mid-sentence when Sarah entered. The silence was deafening. "This is Sarah Mitchell," James said smoothly. "She's been helping with Ethan's schoolwork." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Have we met before? You look so familiar." "I don't believe so." Sarah forced a smile. "I just have one of those faces." Eleanor Bennett's perfectly manicured hand clutched her pearls. "James, darling, you didn't mention—" But whatever she didn't mention was interrupted by Ethan's burst through the door. "Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt Rachel." The tension dissolved into birthday chaos. Sarah retreated to the kitchen, helping Maria with party preparations while the family caught up. She could hear their voices drifting in, stories about Claire, memories of past birthdays, the comfortable shorthand of people who shared a history. "Miss Mitchell," Maria's voice was soft. "The cake needs collecting from the front gate." Grateful for the escape, Sarah headed out, but Rachel followed. "I know what's going on here," Rachel said once they were alone. Sarah's heart stopped. "I'm not sure what you mean." "James hired you to help Ethan connect with Claire's memory." Rachel's voice softened. "I saw the resemblance immediately. It's uncanny." "Rachel, Thank you," Rachel interrupted, "for giving my nephew something of his mother, even if it's just echoes." Sarah stood frozen, wondering if this was acceptance or accusation. Before she could respond, Ethan's voice called out, "Sarah, come see what Grandpa got me." The party progressed, and Sarah found herself navigating an intricate dance of half-truths and careful distances. She helped serve cake, took photos, and stayed just visible enough to be present but not prominent. Later, as the family gathered around Ethan opening presents, James caught her trying to slip away. "Stay," he whispered. "Please. You're part of this now." And somehow she was. Sitting there watching Ethan's face light up with each gift, hearing him explain to his grandparents about the solar system project Sarah helped me with, she realized they'd created something real within the fiction. That night, after the family had gone to their hotels and Ethan to bed, Sarah found a small package on her guest house steps. Inside was Claire's silver compass necklace and a note from Rachel. She would have wanted him to have someone. "Thank you for being that someone." Sarah held the compass, its weight identical to her mother's, and wondered if sometimes the truest path forward was the one you never planned to take. The faculty mixer at Sarah's tutoring center should have been routine. Just teachers discussing struggling students over cheap wine and stale crackers, until she heard a familiar voice. Sarah? Sarah Mitchell. She turned to find Mark Peterson, her former colleague from her teaching days, staring at her with undisguised shock. I thought that was you. He moved closer. What happened? You disappeared after my mother died, Sarah finished quietly. I needed a fresh start. Are you teaching here full-time? His eyes were kind, concerned, and dangerous to everything she'd built. Part-time, just mornings. She glanced at her watch. Actually, I need to... Hey, aren't you working with the Bennett kid? I saw you at Westbrook Academy last week. My daughter's in his class. Mark's brow furrowed. The kids are saying you're his mum. Sarah's wine glass nearly slipped from her hand. What? Yeah. Tommy Harris told Emma that Ethan said his mum was back, but wasn't his mother. I have to go. Sarah set down her glass, grabbing her bag. It was good seeing you, Mark. She made it to her car before the panic hit fully. Ethan was telling his classmates she was his mother. The careful construction of their arrangement was crumbling. The drive to the Bennett estate felt endless. She found James in his usual spot, the study, surrounded by work he used to avoid thinking too much. Ethan's been telling his classmates I'm his mother. James looked up sharply. What? How do you... It doesn't matter how I know. Sarah paced the room. This has gone too far. We're not helping him anymore. We're confusing him. He's just excited to have someone... No. Sarah stopped, facing him. He's living in a fantasy we created and it's spreading. His classmates, their parents. How long before someone puts it together? Before they realize who I really am? James stood, moving toward her. We can fix this. Talk to him, explain... Explain what? That we've been lying to him, that every story, every moment we've shared is built on deception. Not every moment. His voice dropped. Sarah, what we've created here... Stop! She stepped back. This isn't about us. It's about Ethan. Of course it's about Ethan. Everything I do is about Ethan. Is it? Sarah challenged. Or is it about you not wanting to face the reality that Claire is gone? The words hung between them, sharp and irretrievable. Get out! James's voice was ice. James! Get out! Sarah fled to her guest house, hands shaking as she packed her bag. This time she couldn't run from debt collectors or medical bills. She was running from the truth, that somewhere between the lies and the love, she'd lost sight of who she really was. Her phone buzzed, a text from Mark. Hey, hope I didn't upset you earlier. If you need to talk... She turned off the phone, sinking onto the bed. Both compass necklaces, her mother's and Claire's, lay tangled on the nightstand, their arrows pointing in opposite directions. Tomorrow she would have to choose which path to follow. But tonight, she let herself mourn everything she'd gained and lost in this beautiful, terrible charade. The morning sun found Sarah sitting on the guest house porch, both compass necklaces laid out before her. She hadn't slept. At dawn, she'd made her decision. But Ethan beat her to it. Are you leaving? His small voice startled her. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, still in his pajamas, clutching his backpack. Ethan, you shouldn't be out here alone. Does your father know? Are you leaving? He repeated, harder this time. Sarah patted the space beside her. Come sit with me. We need to talk. I heard you and Dad fighting. He climbed up but kept his distance. And I heard Tommy's mom at school. She said it was weird how much you looked like my real mom. Sarah's heart clenched. What do you think about that? I think... His voice wavered. I think I knew. Maybe not at first, but Dad never talked about you before. And sometimes when I ask about mom stuff, you look at him first, like you're checking answers. A tear slid down Sarah's cheek. You're very observant. Why did you do it? No anger in his voice, just confusion. Why did you pretend? Your father wanted to help you understand your mother better, and I... She struggled for the right words. I wanted to help a little boy who reminded me of myself. I lost my mum too, you know. Ethan's eyes fixed on the two compasses. Like that one? Was it hers? Yes, just like your mum's. Sarah picked up Claire's compass. Your Aunt Rachel gave me this one. She thought you should have it. Did you ever meet my real mum? No, honey, I didn't. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes when you help me with homework or make the peas taste better, I pretend too, that you're really her. Is that bad? Sarah pulled him close, and this time he didn't resist. No, it's not bad. But it's not real either. And you deserve real things, Ethan. Real memories of your mom, and real relationships with people who care about you. Like you. Yes, like me, but as myself, not as a replacement for your mother. The screen door creaked. James stood there, looking like he hadn't slept either. I heard voices, he said quietly. Ethan, buddy, you scared me. I couldn't find you. I'm okay, Dad. Sarah and I are just telling the truth now. James sank into a chair, the weight of everything showing on his face. I'm so sorry, son. This was my fault. I thought I was helping. We all did, Sarah said. But now we need to make it right. Ethan picked up Claire's compass. Can you tell me real stories about Mom? Not pretend ones? James nodded, tears in his eyes. Yeah, buddy. I think it's time I did that. And can Sarah still help me with homework? As just Sarah? Sarah looked at James, who met her gaze steadily. If she wants to, he said. I'd like that, Sarah replied. Very much. The sun climbed higher, warming the three of them as they sat together, no longer bound by elaborate deceptions, but by something simpler and truer. It wasn't the family any of them had imagined, but maybe it was the one they needed. Sarah's resignation letter sat unopened on James's desk for 3 days. She continued her morning tutoring job, but afternoons with Ethan had become complicated terrain. Every shared glance with James felt weighted with unspoken words. The breaking point came during Thursday's homework session. Ms. Thompson asked about you today, Ethan said, working on his math problems. She wanted to know if you were really my mom's college friend. Sarah's pencil stilled. What did you say? Nothing. Dad says we need to be careful how we explain things. He looked up at her. But I don't want to lie anymore. Before Sarah could respond, Maria appeared in the doorway. Miss Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. Mark Peterson stood in the foyer, his expression grim. Sarah, we need to talk. She led him to the garden, away from curious ears. How did you find me? It wasn't hard. The Bennetts are pretty well known. He sat on a stone bench. Sarah, there are rumors circulating at Westbrook. Parents are asking questions. What kinds of questions? About who you really are. Someone recognized you from the shelter near the school. He leaned forward. They're saying James Bennett hired a homeless woman to pretend to be his dead wife. The world tilted sideways. Mark, it's not... I don't need explanations. He held up a hand. But the school board might. They're meeting tomorrow. After he left, Sarah found James in his study. It's over, she said simply. The school board knows. His face drained of color. How? Does it matter? We have to tell Ethan before he hears it from someone else. But they were too late. Ethan burst into the study, his phone clutched in his hand. Everyone's talking about it. Tommy's mom sent a message to all the parents. They're saying... His voice broke. They're saying you were homeless and Dad paid you to lie to me. Ethan, James started. Is it true about the shelter? Ethan's eyes fixed on Sarah. Were you really homeless? Sarah knelt before him. Yes, after my mother died, I lost everything. Your father found me there and offered to help. But Ethan, the care I have for you, that was never pretend. You lied. Both of you. He backed away. I hate you. I hate both of you. He ran from the room, his footsteps thundering up the stairs, followed by the slam of his bedroom door. James moved to follow, but Sarah stopped him. Let him process this. The board meeting? I'll go. I'll explain everything. She straightened her shoulders. It was my choice too, James. I'll face the consequences. That night, Sarah packed her bags again, this time with no intention of unpacking them. She left both compass necklaces on Ethan's desk with a note. Sometimes people lose their way trying to help others find theirs. I'm sorry for my part in that, but know that every moment I spent with you was real, even if the story wasn't. Find your own true north, Ethan. With love, Sarah. She called a cab and waited in the dark, watching Ethan's window until the light finally went out. 3 weeks passed. Sarah threw herself into her tutoring job, ignoring the whispers and sideways glances at Westbrook Academy. The school board had been surprisingly understanding after she explained everything, though they requested she limit her presence on campus. Her new apartment was small, but clean, paid for with honest work. Each morning she walked past the bus shelter where it all began, remembering a different life. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Dear Ms. Mitchell, it began in Ethan's careful handwriting. Dad says I don't have to forgive you yet if I'm not ready, but I miss you. Not as my pretend mom, but as Sarah, as my friend. She read it 3 times before noticing the second page, a note from James. The board cleared everything. No charges will be filed. Ethan's in therapy now. Real therapy, not well-intentioned deception. He's doing better, we both are. That afternoon, rather than turn right toward her apartment, Sarah walked to Westbrook Academy. She found Ethan sitting on the front steps, waiting for his father. "Your letter found me," she said softly. He looked up, his face a mix of emotions. "You came?" "Of course I did." She sat beside him, maintaining careful distance. "How's the science project going?" "Not as good as the solar system." He kicked at a pebble. "Dad tried to help, but he's not very artistic. He tries his best." "Yeah." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "He talks about Mom more now. Real stuff, not just the perfect things, like how she burned cookies and sang off-key." Sarah smiled. "Those are the best kinds of memories. I kept the compasses," he said suddenly. "Dad helped me hang them in my room. One pointing east, one west. He says sometimes you have to lose your way to find it again." "Your dad's getting pretty wise." "Sarah?" Ethan turned to face her. "Could we maybe start over? Not with the pretend stuff, just you helping me with homework sometimes. As you." Before she could answer, James's Tesla pulled up. He got out slowly, uncertainty clear on his face. "Hello, Sarah." "James." She stood. "Ethan and I were just talking about homework." "We have cookies," Ethan blurted out. "Real ones from the store since Dad can't bake. And I have this history project." James met Sarah's eyes. "You're welcome to come over if you want. No pretenses this time." Sarah looked between them, the boy who'd taught her about second chances and the man who'd risked everything to help his son heal. Then she looked at the bus shelter across the street, where a different Sarah had once sat, lost and alone. "I'd like that," she said. "Just let me be clear about one thing." They both waited. "I'm bringing my own peas recipe this time." For the first time in weeks, Ethan laughed. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't pretend. It was something better. It was real. The first session of family therapy was harder than any of them expected. Dr. Reeves, a gentle-voiced woman with kind eyes, sat across from the three of them in her sunlit office. "Let's start with why you're here," she said, looking at each of them in turn. Ethan spoke first. "Because we all lied, and now we're trying to fix it." "That's very direct, Ethan." "Doctor," Reeves smiled, "can each of you tell me what you hope to gain from these sessions?" James shifted in his chair. "I want to learn how to talk about Claire. Really talk about her, not just the perfect version I created. I want to know if it's okay to still care about Sarah," Ethan said quietly. "Even after everything." Sarah's throat tightened. "I want to help make this right. To find a healthy way to be part of Ethan's life, if that's what he wants." Over the next hour they navigated difficult truths. James admitted his fear of tarnishing Claire's memory by acknowledging her flaws. Ethan confessed he sometimes felt guilty for wanting Sarah in his life, like he was betraying his real mother. Sarah spoke about her own loss and how it had clouded her judgment. "Grief," Dr. Reeves explained, "can make us do things we never thought we would. The question is, what do we do after?" After the session, they stood awkwardly in the parking lot. "Hungry?" James asked. "Maria's making lasagna." "I have papers to grade." Sarah hesitated. "Please." Ethan looked up at her. "We could work on my history project after, the real way." That evening they sat around the kitchen table. No pretenses, no stories, just three people sharing a meal and starting over. "Dad showed me Mom's old report cards," Ethan said between bites. "She got a D in math once." "Really?" Sarah smiled at James's discomfort. "She was brilliant at everything else," James defended. "But numbers, those were her kryptonite." Later, helping Ethan with his homework, Sarah noticed the compasses on his wall, two arrows pointing in different directions, but somehow creating a perfect balance. Sometimes, she realized, the longest journey wasn't about finding your way back, it was about finding your way forward. October brought crisp air and change. Sarah's tutoring center promoted her to lead instructor, and her new apartment finally felt like home. The whispers at Westbrook had faded to background noise, replaced by genuine respect for her teaching abilities. "I got an A on my history test," Ethan announced during their Wednesday study session. They'd settled into a routine, 2 afternoons a week, strictly homework and academic support, with Dr. Reeves's approval. "That's fantastic." Sarah looked over the paper. "Your essay on the Civil War was especially good. Ms. Thompson said my analysis was very mature." He fidgeted with his pencil. "Dad's taking me to Mom's grave this weekend, to put flowers. Would you come with us?" Sarah set down the test paper. "Ethan, I don't think, not as her," he added quickly. "As you, as my friend. Dr. Reeves said it might be good for all of us." That Saturday, Sarah stood slightly back as James and Ethan placed roses on Claire's grave. The autumn wind rustled through nearby trees, carrying the scent of approaching winter. "She would have been proud of you," James told his son, his voice steady. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're you." Ethan traced the letters on the headstone. "I told her about the A," he whispered, "and about Sarah helping me the real way." On the drive back, Ethan fell asleep in the back seat. James glanced at Sarah. "Thank you for coming." "He's stronger than we gave him credit for," she replied softly. "We all are." James kept his eyes on the road. "The school board chair called yesterday. They're reviewing their family support services. They want your input, given your unique perspective." Sarah watched the familiar streets pass by. "Sometimes the worst decisions can lead to something good, if we're brave enough to learn from them." At home, as Ethan showed Sarah his latest art project, James watched them from the doorway. No more pretending, no more scripts. Just a boy, his father, and the woman who'd helped them find their way back to truth. Sometimes, Sarah realized, family wasn't what you lost or what you found. It was what you built, one honest moment at a time. "College essays," Sarah exclaimed, looking at the stack of papers on Ethan's desk. 4 years had transformed his room from space models to SAT prep books and university brochures. "I can't believe we're here already. Can you look at my personal statement?" Ethan, now 13 inches taller and with a deepening voice, handed her a draft. "I wrote about Mom and everything that happened." Sarah sat in his desk chair reading carefully. The essay was beautifully honest, about loss, deception, forgiveness, and the complex ways people try to heal each other. He'd written about 2 compasses showing different directions, and how sometimes the truest path forward isn't the one you planned. "It's perfect," she said finally. "But are you sure you want to tell this story?" "Dr. Reeves says, our stories make us who we are." He gestured to the wall where the 2 compasses still hung, even the complicated ones. From downstairs, James called up, "Dinner's ready, and I didn't burn it this time." They found him in the kitchen, proudly presenting a lasagna that actually looked edible. Over the years, he'd learned to cook, just as he'd learned to talk about Claire without idealizing her, to parent without perfect answers, and to build something new from the ruins of their elaborate deception. "I got a call from the education board today," Sarah mentioned as they ate. "They want to expand the family counseling program we developed, 3 more schools next year." "That's amazing," James said warmly. "You've turned quite a story into quite a legacy." Ethan looked between them, the father who'd risked everything to help him heal, and the woman who'd started as a well-intentioned lie and become something truthfully irreplaceable. "I'm putting this in the essay too," he declared. "How sometimes real love isn't about who you've lost, but who you choose to become." Sarah reached for her necklace, her mother's compass, now accompanied by a simple silver band. Not Claire's necklace, that remained with Ethan, but a new one, marking a different kind of journey. James squeezed her hand under the table. They'd married last spring in a small ceremony where Ethan gave a speech about second chances and true north. No pretense, no replacement, no shadows. Just 3 people who'd learned that sometimes the longest way around is the shortest way home. "To real love," James raised his glass. "To real love," Ethan and Sarah echoed. Outside, the sun set on another ordinary day in their extraordinary journey. 2 compasses pointed in different directions, both somehow leading exactly where they needed to be.